and thank you for attending tonight. My name is Megan Pinchback. I am the owner of Dyslexia on Demand. And we really, tried to lead this webinar just to help to spread the knowledge of what dyslexia is, what dyslexia therapy is, and why that's considered to be different than any kind of dyslexia tutoring that's out there. Just kind of delineate the differences and just further that knowledge of structured literacy out here. So this is a small group. The intent is that this is really informal, and I would love you guys to feel comfortable to stop me at any point to ask questions. There will be a Q&A at the end. So if you feel like it's a question that might take quite a long time to answer, I guess go ahead and save it till the end. But for the most part, I really want this to be an informal discussion, and that's why it is in this format versus just pre-recorded. So just so that you guys know that, I will go ahead and get started and share my screen. Okay, so my apologies. I have two screens, so if I am not looking into the camera, but I think most people are probably focused just on the slideshow. So again, this is considered to be kind of a 101 explanation in general. This is going to be more basic dyslexia education and education on dyslexia therapy versus, kind of more advanced explanation. So I am more than happy to field any really advanced questions kind of on the side through email, whatnot, but tonight's intention is to be more of an overview, but I think it's extremely informative. So okay, so I always want to start with what the myths of dyslexia are to try to explain, I think, some of the socially accepted ideas and why it's tends to be different. So first of all, it's that dyslexia is just letter reversals. This is a core feature. This is one of the pieces, but that is not exclusively what makes up dyslexia. As a lot of you probably know, reversals are completely developmentally appropriate and normal until about the age 7, as long as we've received adequate instruction. Just in general, that you're going to grow out of dyslexia. I showed by decade what some of those myths have been, that you're going to, grow out of it, that it's reading and writing backwards, that males are more, sorry, I have to multitask. I am running all the controls. Males are more likely to be dyslexic. Colored overlays, that's a big time myth in general. You'll find out later on in this presentation that dyslexia does not discriminate. It's equally found amongst gender. And today, and one of the things that we face a lot is that dyslexia is a medical condition, and that gifted kiddos can't have them, and it's primarily a vision problem. I would say the ones that exist today are some of our biggest issues. It is not a medical condition. Some states like to say that because it is neurobiological in origin, but what I like to say is so is everything. All right, here is the definition that is provided by the International Dyslexia Association, and it is the most common definition of what you're going to find out there. So I'll let you guys all read this over yourself, but I will point out some of the things that are highlighted, and we will go deeper into some of those things. Like I said, that it is neurobiological in origin, and this is completely true. It is based in the brain, so is, all learning, obviously. So it's characterized with difficulties in accurate or fluent word recognition, poor spelling and decoding abilities. And the next slide will go deeper into this, that it is a deficit in the phonological component of language. So it is based in the phonological processor of the brain. So this is true. And secondary consequences are reading comprehension, reduced reading experience that can impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. Now, this is obvious to most people that if we have difficulty decoding the words, then it's going to impact our amount of comprehension and the amount of vocabulary that we develop with time. The more that we read, the more that we acquire the vocabulary. The more that our brain is taxed with complications in the decoding, the less ability we are going to have to grow as readers and to understand what we're reading. So that phonological component of language, I wanted to break down what that means, because that's not a common term to most people. It seems like you would understand what it means in terms of, phonological phonics, but it's the sound system of our language. And obviously these problems can lead to, our ability to learn to read. So intelligence does not always lead to strong reading skills. Our children with dyslexia tend to have average, if not above average IQ. And in fact, lots of them are what's considered to be twice exceptional, that they are both gifted and have dyslexia or some, specific learning disability in reading. The two can coexist. And so that explains why our children can do really well in other areas, but still have trouble with the reading. So that phonological processor is what's is what's considered to be phonemic awareness, that understanding that letters are connected to sounds, the ability to recognize that symbol, the phonological memory, like I was saying, the ability to recall that letter makes that sound or even identify what that letter is, and then rapid naming, the ability to bring it back quickly. These are all skills that we need as good readers. All right, so the word dyslexia in itself, as an academic language therapist, we like to break down what the meaning, the morphology of that word means. And it literally translates into difficulty with language. So as you can see from the Greek, with dys and lex. Okay, so, and then again, highlighting, I'm trying not to read everything off the screen, my apologies, but it originates in the neurobiological differences in the way that brain processes language. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and play a video for you guys that I feel like does a really basic job of explaining dyslexia.
Take a moment to read the following. How was that? Frustrating? Slow? What were those sentences about? They're actually a simulation of the experience of dyslexia, designed to make you decode each word. Those with dyslexia experience that laborious pace every time they read. When most people think of dyslexia, they think of seeing letters and words backwards, like seeing B as D and vice versa. Or they might think people with dyslexia see saw as was. The truth is, people with dyslexia see things the same way as everyone else. Dyslexia is caused by a phonological processing problem, meaning people affected by it have trouble not with seeing language, but with manipulating it. For example, if you heard the word cat and then someone asked you remove the C, what word would you have left? At. This can be difficult for those with dyslexia. Given a word in isolation like fantastic, students with dyslexia need to break the word into parts to read it. Fan-tas-tic. Time spent decoding makes it hard to keep up with peers and gain sufficient comprehension. Spelling words phonetically like S-T-I-K for stick and F-R-E-N-S for friends is also common. These difficulties are more widespread and varied than commonly imagined. Dyslexia affects up to 1 in 5 people. It occurs on a continuum. One person might have mild dyslexia, while the next person has a profound case of it. Dyslexia also runs in families. It's common to see one family member who has trouble spelling, while another family member has severe difficulty decoding even one-syllable words like catch. The continuum and distribution of dyslexia suggest a broader principle to bear in mind as we look at how the brains of those with dyslexia process language. Neurodiversity is the idea that because all our brains show differences in structure and function, we shouldn't be so quick to label every deviation from the norm as a pathological disorder, or dismiss people living with these variations as defective. People with neurobiological variations like dyslexia, including such creative and inventive individuals as Picasso, Muhammad Ali, Whoopi Goldberg, Steven Spielberg, and Cher, clearly have every capacity to be brilliant and successful in life. So here's the special way the brains of those with dyslexia work. The brain is divided into two hemispheres. The left hemisphere is generally in charge of language and ultimately reading, while the right typically handles spatial activities. fMRI studies have found that the brains of those with dyslexia rely more on the right hemisphere and frontal lobe than the brains of those without it. This means when they read a word, it takes a longer trip through their brain and can get delayed in the frontal lobe. Because of this neurobiological glitch, they read with more difficulty. But those with dyslexia can physically change their brain and improve their reading. With an intensive multisensory intervention that breaks the language down and teaches the reader to decode based on syllable types and spelling rules, the brains of those with dyslexia begin using the left hemisphere more efficiently while reading, and their reading improves. The intervention works because it locates dyslexia appropriately as a functional variation in the brain, which naturally shows all sorts of variations from one person to another. Neurodiversity emphasizes this spectrum of brain function in all humans and suggests that to better understand the perspectives of those around us, we should try to not only see the world through their eyes, but understand it through their brains.
All right. Okay, so more dyslexia facts. In general, 5 to 15% of Americans have dyslexia. What that works out to be, we like to say in the industry, between 17 and 20% of people are impacted with dyslexia. And remember, that is a spectrum disorder. So some are more severe, profound, while others are mild. So we equate that to being that's where our 1 in 5 number comes from. And it also impacts all, equally dispersed amongst genders and economic and ethnic groups. All right, so this kind of breaks down a little bit more about what's happening in the brain, like the video did. So when we look at the brain, that phonological processor is the piece of the brain that is not working. So when you look at brain scans and actually, MRIs, you can actually see the differences in terms of the parts of the brain that light up in dyslexic individuals or don't light up as much, and those with neurotypical reading brains. Okay, so this scan shows it a little bit deeper. So obviously this part, the overactivation part in the bronchus area, and then where it lights up as a typical reader. And you will see the difference of this scan at the end of the presentation once the appropriate intervention has occurred. So a lot of people say, well, but my child or my student, they're still reading. So I always like to explain to parents that that even though you see some level of reading occurring, it's really based on memory. So these kiddos are memorizing everything in their brain, and they're not utilizing the phonemic awareness that's needed, you know, because that part of their brain is not processing that language with automaticity as a neurotypical reading brain would be doing. So it's really important also that you understand that because they are seeing things as pictures, they're memorizing and compensating, it is really, really overtaxing their working memory. And the amount of energy that they need to expend to is about, you know, 20 times higher than, you know, than you if you are not dyslexic. And just a reminder to everybody to go ahead and mute for right now unless you have a question. Okay, so this slide kind of lines out some of the difficulties that are associated with dyslexia. So some of the primary and secondary difficulties that they see. And I'm sure that if you have a dyslexic loved one, if you yourself are dyslexic or have students who are dyslexic, you can see a lot of these things. Here, I'm gonna see if I can move that person. All right, so some of these slides kind of repeat, and my apologies for things that I may have already said. But again, boys and girls are equally impacted. About 20% of our kiddos can learn to read. And when instruction's optimal, all that, but about 5% can be brought into the average range of reading. So one of the things that's important to touch on is that 70 to 80% of kids with dyslexia come with comorbid conditions. So those most commonly include ADHD, speech difficulties, which then impact their receptive and expressive language, but also some of them have working memory deficits that are very severe. Some of them have auditory processing speeds, a lot of things that can impede and cause that 5%. All right, so this goes ahead and just lines out some of the primary symptoms that I'm sure a lot of you can identify with. So problems learning the letter names and sounds. Those are the things that some of the telltale signs in the beginning, especially in kindergarten, first grade, when we're still having that issue, when we've had adequate amount of exposures, but really still having a hard time grasping those letters and those sounds. And then obviously that, you know, applies into difficulty reading single words, especially, you know, those instant words, that kind of what we call those instant words, those sight words, and it is that all kind of have a similar shape. So you can imagine if you're relying on memorization, that is going to impact, you know, all the, you know, these then similar pattern words. And then again, of course, a lack of fluency. If you're having trouble decoding words, reading very slow with lots of mistakes, again, fluency, and then difficulty learning to spell. So it's really important also that everyone understands that reading is just as much tied into spelling. They really go hand in hand. So writing, you know, literacy does definitely include the spectrum of all the skills. Then again, of course, additionally, they have trouble understanding what they're reading. If you have trouble decoding the words, you are going to have a difficult time understanding what you read, right? And then further being able to write those sentences in those paragraphs. So we like to say that dyslexia is unexpected in relation to other cognitive and academic abilities. So it's a sea of strengths. So there's this like all these amazing abilities that these kids have. They're really analytical thinkers, very creative, and they may have strength in math, you know, because they can compute that in their head. A lot of times I hear how kiddos with dyslexia don't think sequentially. They can jump from, you know, the beginning right down to the solution without needing to think those things in between because of their strong, amazing brains. But then we have this unexpected weakness that doesn't really make any sense. Okay, and unlike oral language, reading does need to be explicitly taught. So that's something that really feeds in to structured literacy, that, you know, the fact that that things aren't always just, learned by osmosis, or just learned in the environment that they're in. So that balanced literacy approach. Some kiddos can pick this up very easily on their own, but especially our kids with dyslexia really struggle with that. They need that explicit systematic instruction for literacy. And actually data shows that up to 60% of kids need much more explicit instruction than what is provided in the classroom. All right, sometimes I need to go through and eliminate some of these because it's a little bit repetitive. So I'll go ahead and let you guys read these off the screen. All right, so I did want to throw this in here also because dysgraphia does, hang out with dyslexia quite frequently. A lot of kids have both. Sometimes, like in my son, you can just have dysgraphia. So it's important to be able to understand the difference between the two. So as a whole, I always tell clients or anyone that I'm speaking to that dysgraphia specifically impacts 3 areas. So that's going to be, of course, the kind of more cliche one in terms of fine motor skills and handwriting. It is spelling, but a huge piece of it that I think isn't understood is that it's the executive functioning piece of that. Now, executive functioning can seem like a very confusing word, but that really just means like the secretary of the brain, and as far down as we want to drill that. So that really goes even just to, sentence organization. What is the order, the subject predicate, where does everything fall? How do I get my thoughts onto paper? So that's a really large piece of dysgraphia. And I will tell you that there is no explicit programming for dysgraphia, like exclusively, but all 3 of those components are addressed when we're talking about language therapy. All right, so this is the explicit instruction that I'm referring to. You can go ahead and read it off the screen, but we're talking about that phonemic awareness. So just being able to hear and manipulate those sounds that exist in the English language. These are the base blocks of all reading. Then the common term of phonics that I think a lot of people do understand, the sound symbol correspondence specifically, decoding, word recognition, spelling, especially spelling, really needs to be explicit, in my opinion, for all students, regardless of dyslexia or not. Vocabulary, reading comprehension strategies, it kind of goes on and on. Explicitly taught, not just assuming that the kiddo is going to pick it up, but more of a, just a really clearly thought out step-by-step approach to everything. All right, so some of this is a little bit repetitive, like I said. I think that I've mentioned a lot of this and covered a lot of this, but how do I recognize a student struggling? Some of the things that I failed to mention already in this presentation thus far is that they avoid reading out loud. They're extremely self-conscious, and I don't think that enough people really consider the social emotional aspect of what's happening when you're struggling, and how that impacts the self-concept. And then, of course, avoiding reading for pleasure. When something is very frustrating, you usually don't seek it out in your own time. All right, so now what? So we have a student that clearly fits into that bucket of dyslexia. And by the way, if you ever do need coaching on how do I go about actually, finding a professional or a school district to help me with that specific testing that does help to nail down dyslexia specific, so that I can make sure to get the right intervention from my school or seek out private therapy such as Dyslexia on Demand. I'm more than happy to coach anyone in how to do that, because it really helps to empower you. But one of the things that's really important before we start anything is, are the characteristics unexpected, i.e. there's no other impeding factor that I can see that clearly, explains why this is happening, such as I haven't, given that child adequate educational exposure. Maybe they just started kindergarten and have never done pre-K. They're having trouble grasping the letters and sounds, and it's not happening on your timeline. Maybe that's a reason. Or, we unschool and haven't really been following any kind of explicit curriculum. Maybe that's another reason, right? But if we have given that child an opportunity for adequate exposure, definitely by the time that they're 7, and they've been receiving formalized instruction, then yes, it's probably if you see all those other signs, it's probably a good time to seek a dyslexia evaluation. All right, so early identification is really important. I like to always say that you can turn a speedboat around really quick, but a tugboat takes a lot longer. Whenever we discover dyslexia in 5th grade or even further, it can take much longer to turn around. Ideally, we want to identify these kiddos by 2nd grade and kind of jump on it more quickly, because the quicker that we can actually create those neural pathways that I haven't really discussed a lot about, but we're in the video, the quicker that child will have the toolkit in their brain to be able to process that language, and the quicker that the social emotional impact hasn't really had as much time to set in. So early identification is really, really important. Finding research-based proven techniques is really important. So, evidence-based, research-based structured literacy is extremely important, and I'll touch on that more shortly. Instruction specifically by a certified academic language therapist. Now, I don't know where a lot of you guys are joining me from. Dyslexia on Demand is based in Texas, and in Texas, this is a common profession, or it's not as common as we would like it to be, but it is a commonly understood term and profession in school districts, for example. So a lot of you states, have very, very few who reside in your state. So that's really important for you to understand. And those certified academic language therapists, in other words, a CALT, they use multisensory structured language programs such as Take Flight and Basic Language Skills. So those are 2 programs you'll hear more about at the end of this presentation, or we're coming up on them. And they are actually the only 2 therapeutic level dyslexia intervention programs that do exist. And in order to receive that instruction, it has to be through a CALT, a certified academic language therapist, or one in training, accruing her clinical hours. All right, so I do like to touch on what Orton-Gillingham means, because this is a term that I think that when you are exposed to dyslexia, very quickly you learn that this is an important term, right? So I do like to explain to parents that this is really a generic umbrella term. And what it means is that we are taking a multi-sensory approach to phonics instruction. This term has been around for a really long time, since Orton and Gillingham, 2 neuropsychologists, developed it. They basically figured out that a multisensory approach was what helped those individuals who were word blind. All right, so not all Orton-Gillingham interventions are created equally. So it's really important for you to understand. I like to say that instead of it being a blanket like umbrella term, it's really more of a building, with dyslexia tutoring being at the bottom, with dyslexia therapy being on top. So one of the differences, and very important differences, is that really anybody can implement some level of dyslexia tutoring, whereas a CALT is the only individual who can implement dyslexia therapy. So very little training is given. There are a lot of dyslexia tutoring programs out there, especially that are utilized in the school district. And it's important for people to understand that there has been, very limited training by that, dyslexia specialist or that dyslexia interventionist that's on the campus who is doing this. Additionally, if your student is handled under special education, in particular, if you're not in well, even in the state of Texas, but a lot of places that, you know, a special education teacher is, you know, that's a very blanket term in the sense of they are, you know, handling so many different disabilities that are, you know, in their classroom, and they are not, you know, very specifically trained in dyslexia or any kind of approach in order to properly service these kiddos. So dyslexia tutoring tends to be offered at a much lesser frequency. And I gave you some names of, you know, what would fall into that dyslexia tutoring category. So therapy, you know, is distinctly different in the sense that what we are doing is creating new neural pathways in the brain. So we are following a therapeutic level program with fidelity in order to receive those results. So again, like I said, you can only be a certified academic language therapist. And I think it's really, really important for everyone to understand that you know, proper therapy is following that child very closely and basing their choices and their selections in progressing forward based on the mastery that's already happening and understanding that child. Whereas in a tutoring approach, typically the individual who's leading it understands how to go to the next lesson in the manual, but if it's not connecting, they really don't know how to troubleshoot. A proper CALT, a proper therapist, is going to understand how to read that child's dials and go a little bit deeper when we're not experiencing that success and that growth. And also, you know, kids with dyslexia are like, you know, little snowflakes. And it's really important to understand the profile of each child, what their testing looks like, their, you know, their specific, you know, when we're looking at the breakdown of their dyslexia and where it's more, you know, the areas that it's impacted more, that we drill into those areas that much more. So that is what a certified academic language therapist is trained to do. And someone who is a tutor, you know, really isn't equipped to do. All right, so I have kind of covered the importance of what a CALT is, why it's important, but I find it important to also line out, at least in the state of Texas, and things have changed a little bit, but for the most part, the majority have a master's degree. At one point it was required that you have a master's degree. You have to have 200 advanced hours. So on top of that master's degree, there's another 2 years basically of advanced training and study that everyone needs to do in dyslexia and their therapeutic level program. Then they have to accrue 700 clinical hours under the supervision of a qualified instructor. And then they are eligible to sit for their national board certification. And that happens under ALTA, which is our professional organization, the Academic Language Therapy Association. And only then can they be considered a CALT. Here at Dyslexia on Demand, I do want to mention that we do also have what's considered to be an alt. It lacks that C in front. They have, the majority of them have finished all their classroom hours. They have that master's degree, and they are just now accruing their clinical hours so that they can be eligible for their national board exams to become nationally certified. And those do come at a obviously lesser amount of experience, but also lesser cost. It's a great option for, you know, people depending on the profile of the child. So this is the part where I really want to get in and talk about Dyslexia on Demand. So it's our mission to be CALT-led and give that dyslexia therapy and make it accessible to students in states where it's just not really available. So here in Texas, we have definitely the highest percentage of CALT, certified academic language therapists, in the United States. And that really happens because of the fact that the research came out of Texas. So the places where these therapeutic level programs were both developed in Texas, it has become, we have forward legislation here, and it has become a much more commonplace term. When you look at the United States, and I hope I don't have another slide in here specifying this, but when you look at the United United States as a whole, over 50% of the US states have 10 or fewer registered certified academic language therapists in the state. So you can imagine why the knowledge of dyslexia therapy really doesn't exist. Whereas we've been using it in Texas now for quite a while, since the early 2000s. The research has been out way longer than that. You know, other states have never even heard of it, are not familiar, don't even know that term cult. You know, there are very few, even some of the biggest states. California only has 8 registered in the entire state, for example. So it's really important to, for us to be able to spread that knowledge. And that's why we do things like what we're doing tonight. So we're really passionate about bringing that knowledge to all kids, because all kids with dyslexia really deserve to be taught in the way that their brains need to be taught, so that they can, reap the benefits of just a full life where they don't feel impacted by their reading and spelling abilities all the time. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share a little video about me talking again. Give me a second to get to the right video.
Hi, my name is Megan Pinchback, and I am the owner of Dyslexia On Demand, the premier provider of web-based one-on-one dyslexia therapy. We pride ourselves with connecting certified academic language therapists with students in need countrywide. The company was created with the knowledge of the number of dyslexic children lacking services and the exceedingly small number of certified academic language therapists existing in most areas of our nation. We hope to reach those children who otherwise would not have such access. Our philosophy is a child-focused one. We believe in exclusively taking a one-on-one approach to tailor to the specific needs of each child while maintaining absolute fidelity in the therapeutic program. We place a large emphasis on the social emotional impact of dyslexia on students. We hope to help them begin to honor their differences as a dyslexic individual, so they proudly advocate for themselves and their needs as they grow. We are proud to currently have over 245 cumulative years of dyslexia experience among us and are ready to service your child regardless of their geographic location. Please visit us at dyslexiaondemand.com to learn more about dyslexia advocacy, state-specific dyslexia information, or to schedule an initial parent meeting to see how we can change the life of your child.
All right, this is the first time I've ever noticed that I had an eyelash sitting on my cheek during that video. And by the way, the cumulative years of experience has increased significantly. We have 54 CALTs or CALTs in training here at Dyslexia at the moment. So we have lots of availability throughout the day and time zones. Okay, so here at Dyslexia On Demand, our philosophy is that we are exclusively one-on-one. That has a lot to do with everything I just talked about, the comorbidities in kids, how they are those unique snowflakes, and it's really important that we understand their testing or lead you through how to get the testing in order to really drill down into their specific needs. We are exclusively run by CALTs or CALTs in training, which is really important to know that, you're not just going to get a dyslexia teacher or a dyslexia, a generic term. Most of us are licensed in the state of Texas. We also have therapists actually in up to 7 different states. We are data driven. I really believe that the quantitative numbers really drive our lesson planning. I think that qualitative is where we really overlook a lot of kiddos, and that's what's happening much more so in the classroom. The social emotional aspect is an enormous piece of whenever we are, dealing with kiddos. We cannot overlook that. We do not consider dyslexia to be a bad word. We use it frequently because the more that we teach those kiddos to own their dyslexia, see it as just one little small piece of their profile, and that they have so much more beautiful ness inside. It's so much more than just their struggles, and that their brain just needs to learn the information differently than the way that they've been taught in the classroom because of the structure of curriculum. And last is advocacy. Like I said, it's really important. The more that we can spread that word of what dyslexia is, the more that we have people who are pushing for the right legislation in their states, the more that we're pushing that structured literacy becomes a common term, amongst, all school districts and states. All right, so the two therapeutic level programs that we use here, if you're working with dyslexia on demand, you are going to have exposure to either take flight or basic language skills. Both programs were derived from the same neuro research that happened back in the 60s from the Texas Scottish Rite Hospital for Children. And both are fabulous programs, very similar in scope and sequence and rigor. They each have some anomalies, and I would say that 85% of kids who cross my desk, either program is going to work very well for them. That being said, I like to personally get to know the testing and speak with the parents so that I can understand more about that child's profile to decide if one is better than the other, based on kind of what's being presented, the comorbidities and that kind of thing. So this lines out the different areas that we're focusing in both programs, but it's also important for you to know that every day we are training and growing our therapists in additional programs to layer. So we make sure to deliver take flight or basic language skills with the utmost fidelity so that we can, stand behind our delivery and the research that it was derived from, and know that kiddos, when we're focusing, they should maintain the same trajectory of growth. But sometimes kiddos, depending on their comorbidities, need additional layering of programs, and we know how to do those things. All right, so I promised you that picture of the brain scan of the fMRI study, and you can see that before intervention, you can see the part of the brain that was lighting up, and after successful 2-year course of programming for kiddos with dyslexia, you can see the same areas of the brain light up as the kiddos who had a neurotypical reading brain before. So it is important. I don't know if I touched much on this, but both take flight and basic language skills are very comprehensive. We're looking at not just the phonics, but we're looking at morphology. We're looking at syllable division. We're looking at comprehension, so many layers, explicit spelling, multisensory grammar, so many things that, both of these programs are lined out and expected to be delivered over the course of 2 school years. We do work during the summer, so that time can be shortened, but based on the profile of the child, I don't like, it's important to understand that intervention time can take longer. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And please keep in mind that dyslexia therapy is kind of like braces for the brain. So instead you get a life skill that comes out of it and not a cosmetic, outcome. So this is considered to be a long-term intervention, but it has long-term results when we're working with neural pathways. So this last slide is for Q&A. So I am going to go ahead, honestly, and make my screen a little smaller so I can see you guys. And please, jump in and ask me questions. Oh, my video has been off this whole time. I apologize. Let's see. I can't really see you guys. I'm having trouble with my 2 screens. I apologize. Does anybody have any questions? That is okay if you don't. That means that hopefully I did a good job of explaining everything. Hopefully you can still see my...
I do have one question.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So I am in Texas also, and my eldest son has just been diagnosed with dyslexia, and so which has sparked my interest, as well as I'm a teacher, and so I've had a lot of children with dyslexia in my classes over the last few years. And so I've been looking into programs, and I've seen the Take Flight program, and I've recently found the BLS program. But one that I came across recently was Orton-Gillingham, or the Orton Academy, and it's the Orton-Gillingham approach. And it's not a program, but they teach you the approach.
Right.
Why is that not cult eligible, since all the other programs are based off of that?
So like I said, Orton-Gillingham is going to be more of a blanket term. So it's teaching you to apply that multisensory technique in general, but it isn't following an exact curriculum. So that's a large piece of it. It's definitely not as comprehensive. And I, have known other individuals to implement kind of more of an Orton-Gillingham approach. I think that, in my opinion, I think that's very valuable. And by the way, dyslexia comes in a spectrum. So it's important to keep that in mind, that especially with kiddos who have more mild dyslexia and we are intervening a lot earlier, I think that a hands-on multisensory approach can be very helpful. Because it doesn't take as much work, I guess you could say, to create those new neural pathways and turn that ship around a lot quicker. So I think it's really important to have the really, really in-depth understanding, those 2 years of study and clinical hours which shows you get the opportunity to work with so many kids with dyslexia of varying abilities and varying severities and comorbidities, and really look at literacy as a whole, not just kind of the base block foundational piece of it. So that's just kind of my quick and dirty answer, I guess you could say. The training that it takes to go through the Orton-Gillingham Academy is not nearly as intensive, although I think that there are some programs out there that do put you through quite a lot. For example, Wilson is considered to be definitely dyslexia tutoring, and that is a very, very commonly offered, something that's evidence-based, or it's more of a structured programming, you could say. Right, because a lot of school districts can utilize that with very low, barrier to entry. They can send somebody for a, 30-hour training or less and be able to implement that program. The program's very cheap and so on. So that's where it falls under dyslexia tutoring, and that's actually what they offer at my son's school. But you can go as high, and there are very, very few of them who are Wilson level 2 certified, and those individuals probably rank closer to a cult. They are not recognized under ALTA, but it doesn't mean that they aren't dyslexia experts, you could say. So I think that when you look at anything, there are people probably at the Orton-Gillingham Academy who are very highly qualified and certified, but the majority of people who come out of that are not recognized. And so if they are at that qualified, they should be, it should qualify under the Academic Language Therapy Association. Does that help to answer your question, Megan?
Yeah, it does. It's just been, and I'm sure anyone that's researched any of the, training to become a cult or to become a dyslexia therapist has run across this. It just feels like there's so many programs. And like what you said, I know the school district that my children attend, reading by design is the method of choice. And it's like,
yeah.
Okay, they went to the service center, and I'm not dogging it. I'm sure it has great aspects,
right?
But it's just looking from the parent perspective. When it's your kid, you're like, no. I want the Take Flight program, not the reading by design done with the aid.
So those of you guys who are not in the state of Texas has Texas and Arkansas both have the most dyslexia forward legislation. We are the closest to requiring cults in the school. That being said, there are not enough certified cults to be on every school campus, and some more affluent districts, just so that suburban districts that have lots of money and lots of PTA funds, they are finding their own money to staff a cult. It's become more and more common to be able to receive free therapy on campuses. Now, for everybody else, the state of Texas was like, okay, well, we need to get in line with this, but we don't have the resources to do so. So they created reading by design, and it's basically a very, very watered down approach to structured literacy. So my answer is that reading by, when I said that is not the same as take flight or basic language skills. It is a very watered down approach. It's something, and it will be helpful for some kids, but in my very professional opinion, I would love to see reading by design implemented as the K-1 curriculum for literacy in every classroom, not for kids with dyslexia specific, because it's really important that we understand how dyslexia works. And let me also tell you, and you can't just glean that from a couple hours at the, this regional service center. So that's the really big concern. What's also important for everybody to understand, though, even though, therapy is offered on a lot of these campuses in Texas, in particular in the Dallas area, some in the Austin area, the closest neighboring school district to us, Dripping Springs, they can afford them, but they offer group therapy. Now, there is a lot of limitation where I would much rather somebody get something versus nothing. 70 to 80% of those kids with dyslexia do come with comorbid conditions. And a lot of it is ADHD. A lot of it is, processing speed, working memory, so many other things that are impacting their ability to be able to absorb what's being given to them. And these groups can tend to be 4 or more kids. And those kids just can't focus. I have had a lot of kids come across my desk who are on lesson 92 of Take Flight, but they're still reading at a mid-first grade level. And those things shouldn't happen because that therapist who is leading the group therapy doesn't have the ability to drill down and individualize for each kiddo. And that's really where it needs to be. And that is why Dyslexia on Demand is exclusively one-on-one. So we have the ability to do that. So there's limitations everywhere that you look, unfortunately. I will also I hate to say this, but what is the term? Dyslexia is the, I'm blanking out, but it's basically if you are privileged, you can have intervention. And that is the very unfortunate aspect. They should be funding this. If 1 in 5 kids have dyslexia, we need to be putting proper intervention that's targeted at each kiddo on campuses. There have been studies that have come out more recently of the prison population. It's the most disheartening thing that up to 50% of subsets, when they went out and tested prisoners had dyslexia, and 70 to 80% of them were functionally illiterate. If we didn't actually go through and in that subgroup, test them, they're considered to be functionally illiterate. So all the money that we put into the prison system, if we could just shift it into education, we obviously could change the trajectory. And it's really disheartening. It's really hard to be in this line of work and know some of these things and really want to be able to reach everyone. So it's a matter of, in the school systems, I always like to say it's a really broken system. And everyone has the best intentions for these kids, but it's broken in 50 different places. And most of it's, fueled by money, unfortunately.
I have one more question, and I completely agree with you. I'm sitting here thinking like, wow, if my 2 first grade children could have reading by design as their curriculum, we would be leaps and bounds ahead of where they're going to be come 3rd grade.
Right.
So I'm currently finishing my MEd for diagnostician, and which is, I guess, another native Texan thing. But I have just really I've just really moved to want to do dyslexia more. So I haven't done any training. Where would you suggest I start and which avenue to take?
So I would suggest that you look through, so I don't know where you are in Texas, but we have lots of trainings, lots of virtual trainings. if you're in Dallas, Texas Scottish Rite Hospital for Children trains. If you're interested in Take Flight, McKinney Christian Academy trains. There are a lot of satellite Take Flight Scottish Rite offices. There's one in San Antonio. All these places are offering the Shelton School. All these places are offering virtual training. If you're interested in basic language skills training, Ralston Saunders, the Nyehouse Education Center, all of these places. And it's my goal that for 2022, Dyslexia on Demand is offering the same thing, because the quicker that we can turn the ship around, we just need, the more therapists we need. So it's really important of the awareness. But I think that training to be a diagnostician beautifully complements being a therapist. And I actually have several diagnosticians here on staff. And it's it's very complementary. So, but I can help you with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? So I don't know if you guys mentioned before we go ahead and end for the night, but I think that it is really valuable, and I really want to spread the word on, October is Dyslexia Awareness Month. So we are running a free virtual dyslexia simulation. If you have never experienced this, to kind of put the shoes on of your child, it is extremely valuable. It's very powerful. So highly recommend that you sign up. You can sign up through our website. And somebody just jumped in. They're probably in the wrong time zone. I think that is, besides a thank you, that's it. So I appreciate everybody coming tonight.